Hello again, ladies and gentlemen, Saka here, and welcome back to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition for absolute beginners. In this episode, we will be discovering what races you can play as in the stock 5th edition, so let's start with the Dwarf. Starting on page 18 in the Player's Handbook, if you're following along, we can get a little bit of a detail about what a Dwarf is. As you can see, they are short and stout as indicated by these minis here. The mini on the left came with Tabletop Simulator. The other three came with, I forget which workshop mod it came with, but as you can see, there they are in all of their glory. And this is about the look of the dwarf. We have our typical barbarian dwarfs, kind of a rogue dwarf, and a regular minor dwarf. And as a player, you can choose whatever mini you want, or if you even want minis at all. But in Tabletop Simulator, it's really cool to be able to choose your minis and get a visual representation of what is around you. Let's talk about the base stats of the dwarf and what you will be getting as a dwarf. In order to understand exactly what benefits you get from each of these races, classes, and backgrounds, we actually have to talk about the statistics for your character. As you can see, it's here on our character sheet. Everyone has basic statistics that govern exactly what their character is good at, and each statistic has its own group of skills that can be checked. These modifiers come for dice rolls. When you roll up a character, maximum is 18, and you can only level up a skill to 20 to get the maximum effect. Before we get into the bonuses associated with the races, classes, and backgrounds, let's talk about just the basic statistics that your character possesses. These can range from 3 to 18 on a brand new character, depending on what method you choose to roll up your character with, and we'll cover that into more detail when we actually make our character. But just to understand what these stats mean, strength is how strong you are, dexterity is how nimble you are, constitution is how strong of stomach do you have, or how resilient are you body-wise to poisons and things of that nature. Intelligence is sheer knowledge of everything around you, it's your book smarts. Wisdom is your street smarts, how knowledgeable are you about the world around you, and charisma is how appealing you seem to be towards others when you speak to them or just carry yourself from day-to-day activities. So we won't go into these too awful much in this episode. Just know that these stats are there and they govern all of these different skills. Of course, the higher number you have, the better your skills will be associated with that. Every dwarf you play, regardless of sub-race, gets 2 constitution added to their constitution roll. If you roll an 18, put it in your constitution, choose a dwarf, you get 20, and you have maxed out your constitution score on level 1, which is pretty outstanding. We'll go into exactly what each one of those skills determines later, as I had said before, but just know that every dwarf, no matter what, gets +2 to your constitution roll. A dwarf is considered to be young until they reach 50 years of age and can live up to 350 years. As far as alignment goes, most dwarfs are lawful, and they tend to be good, but there are some lawful evil dwarves out there. It's just up to you as the player on how you would like to play. Dwarves stand between 4 and 5 feet tall and weigh about 150 pounds, and they are classified as a medium-sized creature. Their base speed is 25 rather than 30, however, and each one of these squares represents 5 feet, so instead of moving 6 squares on your turn, a dwarf can only move 5. They have a trait called Dark Vision, in which for 60 feet, they can see in low light conditions. So, 12 squares away, if the hallway is dim, a dwarf can see perfectly fine. You have Dwarven Resilience, which means you have advantage on saving throws against poison. So if someone was trying to poison you and you roll a low d20 number, you can actually roll it again to get a higher number to withstand the poison. And also you are resistant to poison, which means you only take half damage from poison attacks. As a dwarf, you have proficiency in the weapons of the battle axe, the hand axe, the light hammer, and the war hammer, which means you can add your proficiency skill. At level 1, your proficiency will be 2, but this proficiency will add to your attack roll for a greater chance to hit. You have proficiency as well in one of the following tools: smith's tools, brewer's supplies, or mason's tools. So if you wanted to create your own weapons or whatnot, you're proficient in smith's tools. If you wanted to create your own ale, you're proficient in brewer's tools. And if you wanted to craft something out of stone or rock, you have proficiency with stonemason's tools. You also have a skill called Stone Cunning, which means if you make an intelligence-based check on history, and that check is related to the origin of stone, you are considered proficient, and you double your proficiency bonus to the check instead of normal proficiency. So that would be a +4 on history for a level 1 dwarf, looking at where exactly did this stone come from. Pretty powerful stuff. The dwarf also has 2 languages that they know, both Common and Dwarvish. Common is the language that you and I are speaking now, or your native language, and Dwarvish is specifically Dwarven. They can read, write, and speak it. So if they come across a Dwarven scroll, they can read it, they can speak to other dwarfs in Dwarvish, and they can also write in the Dwarven language as well. As a dwarf, you choose from one of 2 sub-races of dwarf. The first is the hill dwarf. It gives you +1 to wisdom, which affects all of these things: your wisdom saving throw, animal handling, insight, medicine, perception, and survival. Those are pretty much exactly as it sounds, so if those things appeal to you, then a +1 to your wisdom is a good thing. Also, you get +1 to your maximum hit points, located here, and your maximum hit points go up by 1 additional every time you level. The second type of dwarf you can choose is the mountain dwarf, which is more of your barbarian fighter type dwarf. They get +2 to their strength, which means if you rolled an 18 and put that in your strength because you want to be a fighter, a mountain dwarf gets an additional 2, maxing out that strength score at level 1, and also making your check bonus a +5. That is as high as you can get. So very, very good. That would also mean you are great at running, climbing, anything to do with athletics as well. You're also proficient in 2 different types of armor. You have your light armor and medium armor, so things like leather and chainmail. You are proficient in, which means you do not take the penalty for wearing it. So very, very good for your fighter dwarf. So if you want to be the fighting kind, then a dwarf is a very solid pick, especially that mountain dwarf with their +2 bonus for strength. The second race we'll be talking about is the elf, known for their pointed ears and their extremely long lifespans. No matter which elf you choose, you get a +2 to your dexterity roll, increasing your modifier and therefore increasing your skills in acrobatics, sleight of hand, stealth, and dexterity saving throws, meaning rocks tumbling down a cliff or something where you have to move out of the way very quickly or get hit. The elf gets a +1 bonus because of their 2 extra dexterity. Elves stand between 5 and 6 feet tall and are considered to be medium sized, which means they take up 1 entire 5-foot square. Their walking speed is 30 feet, which means they can move 6 squares on 1 turn. Their vision is similar to dwarves, but a little bit better. They have dark vision, which means for 60 feet, pitch blackness seems dim, and dim light is completely fine. They don't have any ill effects of dim light at all. When it comes to skills, elves actually get a proficiency in a skill. They are proficient in perception, which means you add your proficiency bonus to whatever you roll. So say, for example, we had a 12 here, and we would get a +1 to our wisdom. Our perception would start out as +1 because that is our modifier. Then we would add our proficiency bonus to it, meaning at level 1, our proficiency is 2. Meaning our perception goes from +1 to +3 on D20 rolls, trying to determine what exactly is around. Perception is good for Hey, you walk into a room, make a perception check. You can take a cursory glance around to see if there are any dangers. You have a trait called Fey Ancestry, which means you get advantage on saving throws against being charmed, which means if you are hit with charming magic and you roll low on a d20, you can roll it again to try to counteract the spell effects. You also cannot be put to sleep. Very handy. You have a feature called Trance, in which you don't need a full 8 hours of sleep to get full benefits. You just go semi-unconscious for 4 hours a day, and you regain all of your hit points, spell slots, everything that you get for 8 hours of good long rest. Like the Dwarf, you also know 2 languages. You know Common and Elven. As an elf, you also have 3 sub-races you can choose to play as: the High Elf, the Wood Elf, and the Drow. As the High Elf, your intelligence skill raises by 1, which means if you are, say, an 11, and right on that break point for 12, that would be very handy to get your extra point. Intelligence, of course, gauges how well you know Arcana, History, how well you do investigations, how well you're in tune with nature, and how well do you know religion. You have training in 4 different styles of weapons: your longbow, short bow, longsword, and short sword. You also know 1 cantrip, which is a magical spell that doesn't take a whole lot of thought. A cantrip is a very low power spell, mainly for, tricking people or casting light or something like that, but you get 1 for free. Intelligence is the spell casting ability for it. Don't worry about this last part, we will delve into spell casting a little bit later. You can also choose 1 additional language of your choice, so a High Elf knows 3 base languages. If you were to choose Wood Elf, your Wisdom score would increase by 1, which affects your animal handling, how well you look into people on your insight, medicine, how well you do first aid, perception, that is the general feel of what is going on around you, and basic survival, finding food out there in the wilderness and things like that. A good one to have for a Wood Elf. You have the same 4 weapon proficiencies as before with your longbow, short bow, longsword, and short sword. You are light on your feet, however, meaning you gain 5 extra feet of speed. Your speed becomes 35, allowing you to move 1 extra square per turn. You have a trait called Mask of the Wild, allowing you to try to hide in natural phenomena such as heavy rain, fog, snow. If it is natural and weather related in nature, you can try to blend into it. The 3rd type of elf is the Drow, which gets +1 to their charisma, affecting their ability to deceive people, their ability to intimidate people, the ability to entertain people, and the ability to persuade people. You also have superior dark vision, meaning instead of 60 feet, you can see 120 feet. Your dark vision doubles. Because they've spent most of their life underground, they do have a sunlight sensitivity though, meaning they have disadvantage on attack rolls and perception checks that rely on sight when the target is in direct sunlight. So if you're outside in a brightly lit field, your attack roll has disadvantage. It's the opposite of advantage, so when you roll your d20 attack, if it's high, guess what? You roll it again and take the lower of the 2 numbers to see if you still hit. Also, as a Drow, you know the Dancing Lights cantrip. It requires concentration for up to a minute, shoots 120 feet, and you create 4 torch-sized lights within range, making them appear as torches, lanterns, or glowing orbs. You can also combine the 4 lights into 1 glowing, vaguely humanoid form of medium size. Each light sheds dim light for a 10-foot radius, and as a bonus action, you move the lights up to 60 feet to a new spot. So think about lights moving down a dark hallway to assist your friends in seeing and that sort of thing. At level 3, you get Fairy Fire, which also requires concentration for up to a minute for 60 feet. Each object in a 20-foot cube is outlined in blue, green, or violet light of your choice. Any creature within the spell is also outlined in light if it fails a dexterity saving throw, and they shed dim light in a 10-foot radius. Any roll against them has advantage if the attacker can see it, and the effective creature or object cannot benefit from being invisible. So if you have creatures that go invisible or like to hide, they cast Fairy Fire and you can see invisible creatures and have advantage against attacking them if you can see it. At level 5, you learn Darkness, which requires concentration for 10 minutes. Magical darkness spreads and fills a 15-foot radius sphere. The darkness spreads around corners. Creature with dark visions cannot see through the darkness. Non-magical light can't illuminate it. If the point you choose is on the object or isn't being worn, the darkness emanates from the object and moves with it, completely covering the source of darkness. With an object such as a bowl blocks the darkness. If any of this spell overlaps with an area of light or lower, the spell that created the light is dispelled. Darkness is good for if you are trying to get away from something. They will not be able to see you. Think of this as like a smoke grenade or a flashbang. The darkness just makes creatures not be able to see you for a sneak attack or something of that nature. But also keep in mind, you can't see them either. Drow weapon training is a little different than the High Elf and the Wood Elf, however, as Drows have proficiency in rapiers, short swords, and hand crossbows. Those are weapons that rely on dexterity skill rather than brute strength, so the high dexterity will go a long way in making those weapons effective. If you're looking for a stealthy character who can nimbly move from place to place and use weapons with a little bit more finesse, then the elf may be your race of choice. The final race we'll be looking at today is the Halfling. They are essentially a hobbit, as you know, Dungeons & Dragons couldn't use a J.R.R. Tolkien style race, so instead of a hobbit they called them the Halfling, but you get the point across. 3 to 4 foot tall, very small, easy to blend in. This is sort of a good thief character. To compound that, the Halfling starts with +2 to dexterity, just like an elf, which improves the acrobatics, sleight of hand, stealth, and the dexterity saving throw modifier. Halflings become adult at the age of 20 and can live to about 200 to 250 years. A halfling's alignment is usually lawful good, as they don't like oppression and they are kind-hearted and curious in nature. Halflings are about 3 feet tall and weigh about 40 pounds, and they are listed as a small creature. With their small size, their speed is affected by that, and they can move 25 feet or 5 squares during their turn. They also have a racial feature called Lucky. When you roll a 1 on an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, you can re-roll the die and must use the new roll. So if you roll another 1, you can't be lucky twice, but it can get you out of a pinch on a natural 1. Halflings are also listed as brave, meaning you have advantage on saving throws against being frightened. If someone is casting a frighten spell on you, you roll the d20 twice and take the higher of the 2 numbers for your saving throw. You have Halfling Nimbleness, meaning you can move through the space of any creature that is a size larger than yours. Halflings are listed as small, so any medium or higher creature, they can move through that square without taking a penalty or using an extra movement to climb through. They just run through the legs of the thing in front of them. Like the other races, they start with 2 languages known, both common and their own halfling language. It says in the player's handbook that they don't have much of a written history, so you won't find any books written in halfling, but their oral tradition is very strong as storytellers and bards. So you will hear halfling before you will see it. There are 2 different sub-races of halfling, so when you choose to play a halfling, you can pick to be stout or lightfoot. The light-footed halfling gets +1 charisma to their dice roll, increasing their skills in deception, intimidation, performance, and persuasion. This is a halfling that likes to talk to people, perform perhaps as a bard, or just deceive or intimidate. Something very small and very angry can be intimidating indeed. The Lightfoot Halfling is also naturally stealthy, meaning you can attempt to hide even when you are obscured by only a creature that is at least 1 size larger than you. So you can hide behind your buddies. You can make a stealth check to see if you hide and enemies won't be able to see you. The other subrace of Halfling is the Stout Halfling. They get +1 to their Constitution roll, and that affects the modifier. This modifier determines how many hit points you gain per level, so they're more of a hardy halfling. And much like the dwarf, you have stout resilience, which means you have advantage on saving throws against poison, and you have resistance against poison damage. So these halflings are the guys that like to drink unknown substances, because hey, it's okay, my stomach is pretty well solid. So while they're not known for their fighting prowess and taking a beating, the halfling's strength comes from its ability to hide, to duck in very small spaces, and having advantage on frighten. So if playing a small creature that can duck in and out of combat without being seen, perhaps performing a nice song, or just being amicable to the other people around, a halfling is a great choice. So I hope going over those three races, the dwarf, the elf, and the halfling, gives you an idea about the differences in races. We're certainly not done though, because in the next episode we will be going over the human, the dragonborn, and the gnome. So if you're not actually set on one of those three races, stay tuned. You might actually like the next ones coming up. Your homework before the next episode: post a comment and say which one of these three sound the most appealing, or even which one would you never play in a million years. Let me know what you think. But like, share, and subscribe if you are so bold. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you for the next episode of D&D for Absolute Beginners. Take care.